Hi, everyone. Okay, so I want to talk about the motor system. I've had a lot of people messaging me, commenting, and so forth, saying that they'd never heard. They're so amazed to learn how much of a role the motor system plays in learning and brain development, and how much of an impact it will have on reading and writing and processing and even focus and so forth. And as you may know, I will be talking more about this tomorrow in my training, weaknesses that affect reading disorders and dyslexia and how to identify them. But I want to touch on it a little bit today, and just to give you a bit of a taster of how this can affect reading. Basically, that's what I want to focus on. So it's really a cultural thing where we tend to think that reading is a skill that we start learning in grade one, when actually the skills that are required to become fluent readers is developed long before our children start school. And that also, kind of just going back to that, cultural thing, is that we tend to view the brain as like a bucket that we need to just fill with facts, and that the more we teach kids stuff, the smarter they're going to become, when actually intelligence, reading ability, writing ability, all of that executive functioning stuff, focus, really starts with the development of the sensory motor system. And the more developed and optimal the sensory motor system is, the better kids learn. And that is what the research shows. So, what happens is that when kids are struggling, we don't look at these simple things. We think, oh, they're just clumsy, or oh, they just have poor balance, or they just don't have very good dexterity with this. That's just an isolated problem. It's not in any way linked to their reading ability, when it actually has a huge plays a huge role. And in fact, studies found that literacy skills were significantly impacted among children who did not crawl. And of course, crawling is not the only thing. There are kids who, didn't creep, they didn't roll over. There's all kinds of factors that come into play. There's so many different milestones, but crawling is huge. And I like to talk about that because every week, like usually several times a week, I talk to people who tell me their kid either didn't crawl till 18 months, or sorry, didn't walk till 18 months. So they might have crawled, but they had a very long, drawn out crawl, or they, hardly crawled. They were an early walker, and both of these things, whether it's being a late walker or early walker, still will affect brain development and sensory motor development, are indications that there's some delays and gaps there and so forth. And so crawling is huge. What researchers found is that when a child is crawling, that the motion of the hands and the knees and so forth, that cross lateral movement, number one, it that exercises the midline. So they're crossing the midline when they're doing that. And it helps to integrate the communication between the two brain hemispheres. The other thing it does is it helps to improve near and farsightedness, because kids are these babies, these networks are not developed, and the motion of crawling helps to improve how their nearsightedness and farsightedness work as they're placing their hands and looking up and looking close and looking up. And we think of that as just, we don't even think about it. I know I certainly didn't when my daughter was crawling, and it plays a huge role in the skills that are necessary for reading and writing. It improves eye tracking, it improves saccadic eye movements, it improves or develops eye teaming or binocular vision. So crawling is huge. And again, crawling also improves auditory processing, because as a child is moving their head back and forth, that's stimulating their auditory cortex and their auditory system, and then they're hearing sounds, and they look up. And what these researchers found is that when these milestones don't occur in the way that they should, there are gaps, there are deficits. And all of the time, moms tell me, my child barely crawled, they were an early walker, they didn't crawl, they did a bum shuffle, they they had this crawl where they were on their feet and their hands instead of their knees and their hands. All of these are things that can impact brain development. And I had a client who really felt like her child was kind of cursed, because she had all these multiple diagnoses, and she was running to 4 different specialists within a 2-week period. It was just this constant ongoing merry-go-round. One specialist to deal with the dyslexia, another the dyscalculia, another to deal with the she was really struggling with low self-esteem. And then another was, I think it was OT for the dyspraxia. Like, that's insane. And it's all connected. It's not individual problems. So what I want to talk about is the one infant reflex that really plays a role with dyslexia and reading difficulties in general. And that is the Stnr, which in this client that I assessed was retained. She didn't crawl, and no surprise, her Stnr was severely retained. I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow, but basically this reflex really helps with developing into the creep, and then the crawl that evolves from the creep, and then essentially it should integrate. And again, essential for vision training as well as stimulation of the auditory system and auditory pathways. And all of that develops the skills for reading and writing. And so what can happen is when kids don't crawl, when this motor system is weak, it can really affect their hand-eye coordination. And these are the kids who might have a hard time tracking, they might lose their place, they might not be able to copy notes from the board. And so just to run through, let me know in the comments below if this sounds like your kid, where it might affect their reading and writing. It might affect their coordination, their visual coordination, their fine motor coordination. I mentioned tracking words, copying notes from the boards, short-term memory, as well as being unable to sit still. They might be really slouchy kids as well. A lot of our kids with learning disabilities, they found not only they have poor sensory motor development, but they just don't have very good posture and so forth. And all of that affects cognition and is tied into why they are struggling with things like learning and focusing and so forth. So we need to integrate that reflex, right? And there's exercises to do that. If you're looking for a quick way to do it, it's not the most optimal, but just quickly, I thought I'd mention it, is literally having your child crawl. I've had actually a child, she was 4 years old, had all kinds of serious delays. She was behind 2 years. She was adopted, had been severely neglected. And mom had her crawling literally on the floor like a baby, 10 to 15 minutes a day, sometimes even twice a day. Mom could not believe the difference in 6 to 8 weeks in her child's cognition, processing, emotional regulation, focusing, all of that stuff. Was it a cure-all? Definitely not, because most of the time these kids have more than one retained reflex. We have to screen and integrate various reflexes that are affecting them. And typically the more severe the learning disability, the more reflexes that are retained and the more severely retained they are. So I'm going to be talking all about this tomorrow in terms of weaknesses that occur in the brain and how those weaknesses are really the cause, or one of the major causes, I should say, of dyslexia, reading disorders, and so forth, and how to identify them. Because really, if you cannot find the cause, you're just going to be spinning your wheels, and your child is just going to be, trying to keep their head above water instead of overcoming this challenge and finding an actual solution that is corrective as opposed to a compensation. So I hope to see you there. It's tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern in my Facebook group, Building Better Brains. Make sure you join if you haven't already. And if you can join the live, then you'll have the opportunity to ask questions, participate, and so forth. So let me know in the comments below, did your child crawl? And also, what are they struggling with as a result? Some of the things I named off in terms of tracking, hand-eye coordination, reading, writing, all of that, and maybe even being able to sit still, all of that type of stuff. So thanks for watching, everyone. And as usual, tag, share, and comment. Have a great day.